DSMA 6, fractions to decimals to percents, and also we're going to do percents to fractions. So you need to know how to manipulate your numbers or to rewrite them, and so that you can present them in a well-mannered form. And sometimes when you're reading articles or even just some graphics, you need to know how to translate maybe from a decimal to a percent to make it easily understood for you. So it's important that you know how to do these translations. We have many problems to practice, so let's get started. So it states on here, another way to write a percent as a decimal is to take the original decimal. So you need to find your decimal for the percentage, and it's after the 5. And then you take that decimal and move it 2 places to the left. So in this case here, I'm going to draw a little arrow so you know you take your original decimal and move it 2 places to the left. And at the same time, you're also going to leave off that percent symbol. So the answer for this one would be 85 hundredths on the rewrite. If we want to change a decimal number to a percent, what we can do is multiply by 100. And what I like to do is remember, just multiply by 100%. If you're going to change into a percent form, you need your percent symbol. So if you take the 78 hundredths times the 100%, you end up with 78%. The other way is just to work in the opposite direction of what we just did on the previous slide. If you know you have 78 hundredths, we are going to take the decimal and move it 2 places towards the right. Just think of it moving towards where you want to place that percent symbol. And so now you would have 78%. So if you have a decimal, change it to a percent. Take your decimal, move it 2 places to the right, add your percent symbol. Or you can also just multiply by 100%. This next graphic is really important. You can see the translation from fractions to decimals. There's a diagram. Out of 100, remember when you're talking about percent, it is per 100, and then they have the last column being percentages. So if we take a look at the very first row here, the fraction is 1 over 10. Now again, you can place this in a calculator or do your long division, and you will end up with 1/10. So if you said that 1 over 10 is 1/10, it is the same thing as writing in decimal form, decimal point 1. If you want to draw a diagram, remember that denominator on the fraction is how many equal parts you should have. So we have 10 equal parts in our diagram, and we're shading 1. 1 represents the numerator. If we want to say out of 100, you can actually take your 1/10, and since the 10 is easily translated into 100 by multiplying both the numerator and the denominator by 10, we will get 10 over 100. And that's giving us the information we need to help translate this into a percentage. So whenever you have the denominator as a 100, the numerator, or the number on top, the 10, is the percent. So 10%. The 20 over 100, so this is 20%. 30 over 100, so this is 30%. As long as the denominator is 100, the number in the numerator is the percent value. So if you take a look at these examples, notice that the denominators are a multiple of 10. All right, so anytime you have a denominator of 10, so if I have this one here, which says 3 over 10, the way you would say that is 3/10 with the THS. So that's equivalent to your 3/10. Again, if we had even, let's do a 9 over 10, you would say that as 9/10. So you can take this fraction and easily translate it into a decimal, right? So as long as the denominator is a multiple of 10, this is easy to translate into a decimal. You have your 17 hundredths, so that becomes decimal 17. Same thing if I put 53 over 100. That's called 53 hundredths. Remember that hundredths position would be the last digit, so 53 hundredths. And again, this one here is 5 hundredths. That's a nice one. It's a single digit number. So what that's telling you is that in your decimal placement, remember this is tens and hundredths, the 5 needs to be in the hundredths position. So that leaves you a 0 to insert in front of it. Let's try another one like that. So I like my 9, so I'll say 9 over 100. So that is 9 hundredths. So the 9 needs to be placed in the hundredths position, and we can't just leave that blank like that. We have to place something. So we'll place the 0. So that is 9 hundredths. Taking a look at the next one, they have 323 thousandths. So remember that last digit in the numerator will end up in the thousandths position. Same thing with the 47 thousandths. The 7 is the last digit in the numerator, so that will end up in the thousandths position. And look, they have my favorite number here. They have 9 over 1,000. So you know that this is the thousandths position. So tens, hundredths, thousandths. The number 9 needs to be placed in the thousandths position. And once again, we're not going to leave that blank. We'll insert the zeros. So we like it when we're dividing by a multiple of 10. So let's take a look at this graphic. They have ratios, decimals, and percents, and you should be able to go back and forth to either one of these. So let's say we started with our fraction, and we've done this one on the previous page. 3 over 10 is 3 tenths, which you can rewrite like this as 3 tenths. And since we know we're going into a percentage form, you can take that decimal on the 3 tenths and move it 2 places to the right and end up with 30%. What they're showing here is that the 3 over 10 on the fraction can be rewritten so that your denominator is a 100. And as mentioned, we did this by multiplying the numerator and denominator of 3 tenths. We multiplied it by 10. That now became 30 over 100. And once you have 30 divided by 100 and the denominator is 100, the number in the top numerator is your percentage. And we can go back and forth here. So let's say I started with a percent. We're at 50% here. So again, you find your original decimal. I think I removed my numbers. There we go. So you find your original decimal, which is after the 0. Remember, you're going to drop your percent symbol and move 2 places to the left. That will change it into a decimal. And then you can say that this is 50 hundredths, or you can say that this is 5 tenths. And we normally would write it as 5 tenths. And from 5 tenths, or in this case, they took the 50 hundredths and they translated it into a fraction of 50 over 100. And then they reduced it to 1/2. So when you have a fraction, you're always going to reduce it to lowest form. So I'm showing you different ways, depending on what's provided for you, your starting position. The next one we can do, say they started us with the decimal, the 75 hundredths. So we can go either way on this. 75 hundredths can be changed into this fraction of 75 over 100. And then we will reduce it to make it 3 over 4 or 3/4. If you have 75 hundredths, remember you can take your decimal, move it 2 places to the right, and add your percent symbol, and that will take you over to the percentage form, 75%. Again, this is another table that is just showing the difference between percent to decimal to fraction, and you can go from fraction to percent or fraction to decimal also. We already did the 75%, so let's just take a look at the 80%. So the 80%, The normal decimal would be after the 0 on the 80%. We would move our decimal 2 places to the left. So the decimal would now be placed in front of the 8, and we would drop our percent symbol. So that ends up turning into 8/10. All right, the way we would say that is not 0.8, but we would say 8/10. So now you have 8/10, and those are both even numbers, so we need to reduce, and we will divide both of these by 2 so that we can reduce our fraction, and we end up in fraction form of 4/5 or 4/5. Okay, and then if we look at, let's say we're doing the decimal form of 99 hundredths. So 99 hundredths, to change it from a decimal to a percent, you move your decimal 2 places to the right and add your percent symbol. If you want to say, let's change the decimal to a fraction, you're going to convert it just the way you would have said this, 99 hundredths, and you'll get 99/100. Okay, and let me take one more look at, let's say, this 150%. Let's see, 150%. We'll find our original decimal, drop the percentage symbol, and run 2 places to the left. So now that decimal is between the 1 and the 5, and that is going to give us this value right here, 1 5/10. So you heard me say that as 1 5/10. So we can actually write this as a mixed number also. So this, turning into a fraction, could be 1 5/10. And again, we're going to take that fraction and reduce it. I will divide each of these numbers by 5, since 5 is a common factor. And that is going to give me 1 1/2. Well, 1 1/2 rewritten is now the same as 3/2. All right, it's the same thing as 3/2. And if you're not sure, we can go ahead and show you that real quick. You have a whole number and a fraction portion. You're going to take the denominator and multiply it times this whole number. So that is 2 times 1, a little time symbol. And you take your product or your result and you go to the right here, and we're going to add the numerator. So this is 2 times 1 plus 1. And we're going to leave that all over that same denominator. And that is going to give you 3/2. Which matches what we have here on our chart. So take a look at all of these, and you can see that also the 100% is the same thing as 1, and 1 is just 1. Okay, in fraction form, you're just going to leave it as a whole number. It's not going to set you up to place it as 1 divided by 1. All right, you always want to reduce your fractions, so that will just leave that off as a 1. Let's see if we can complete the table. So we'll just look around and pick the easier problems to work with from the start. That's kind of a test-taking strategy, is go grab the problems that you know how to do and then go back to the more challenging ones. That way your brain is kind of warmed up as to what to do. So we'll just look at the first one, 25%. We know that the decimal is after the 5. And if I want to change it to a decimal form, I will move the decimal 2 places to the left and add my decimal there. So that would be decimal in front of the 2 and then the 2/5. All right, let me go ahead and add my lead 0 there. Again, you don't have to add the lead 0. You can if you would like to, right? It's a good habit. The next thing we can do is we can take that 25 hundredths or the 25% and change it into a fraction. So if I want to change it into a fraction, remember this is 25 hundredths. So that is 25/100. And I know that 25 will divide into both the numerator and the denominator. So I'm going to do that. I'm dividing both of these by 25. And now that's going to give me 1/4 would be my fraction. So always reduce your fraction. All right, let's look at the Next row, we can actually do this one also. This is decimal point 205, and you can go to percent form or fraction, whatever you choose. I'm going to change this to a percent since it's the easiest at this point. So I know it's a decimal 205, but I'm going to move the decimal 2 places to the right and add my percent symbol. Move the decimal 2 places to the right, so that becomes a 20 decimal point 5 with a percent. So that is my percent, 20 and 5/10%. Sounds strange, but it works. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is to take the decimal and change it into a fraction. The way we would say this in decimal form is 205 thousandths. So that's 205 over 1,000. And it looks like both of these numbers are divisible by 5. So I will go ahead and divide each of these by 5 to reduce into a fraction form. And it looks like I will get 41 over 20. Oops, sorry, 200. Left off an extra 0 there. 41 over 200. Okay. Another one that we could do is, what if you have a fraction of 3/4? You can go in and do your long division if you like. So if I did 4 divided into 3, and some of you will just actually just place it in your calculator and do my long division. I know that I have to place that decimal here. 4 goes into 37 times. It gives me 28. Remainder of 2. Bring down my 0. So I can see that it's going to be 75 hundredths. Just by doing long division, my decimal form is going to be 75 hundredths. And once again, we know how to move that decimal 2 places to the right to get our percent. And that gives us 75%. All right, so the next problem, we actually have a few different ways we can do that. We can actually take the 33 1/3% and change it into what we call an improper fraction. So if I took 33, let's do this at the bottom here. Remember, I'm taking the denominator, multiplying it times the whole number, and adding 1, and keeping it all over the same denominator. So as a percent written in fraction form, that is going to give me 100 over 3. 100 over 3. Remember, this is still the percent. Now, the percent symbol itself is the same thing as 1 over 100. Remember, it is out of per 100, means we're dividing by 100. So if we were to do something like this, we can see that we're multiplying right here. We know that the 100ths would divide out, leaving us 1. Multiplying straight across, numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. Or for your lucky self, you can just place this in a calculator and it will calculate it for you. So the fraction form is 1/3 for this problem. 1/3. And once again, if you place this into your calculator and you do your long division, let me see if I can sneak this in here somewhere. If I did 3 divided into 1 and place my decimal, you're going to see that I will keep having repeating 3's because I will always have a remainder of 1. I keep getting a remainder of 1 when I'm done. So repeating 3's will look like this. All right, let's look at the next problem. If you take 8 and divide it into 5, you're going to end up with the decimal form. It is a terminating decimal. In other words, it stops. You'll get 625 thousandths. All right, that is just 8 divided into 5. And I'll make a note down here for you. 8 divided into 5. And that will give you decimal 625 when you're done. And then once you have the decimal form, we can change it into a percent by moving 2 places to the right. Add your percent symbol, and that will give you 62 and 5/10%. So the only time students usually miss this if they forget to put their percent symbol down. Okay, the last one, we're going to take that decimal and move it 2 places to the left and drop off your percent symbol. So this becomes 0.75, which now translates into 75 thousandths. Remember, that is called 75 thousandths. And then when we reduce this, we can divide both of those numbers by 25. And your calculator will do it for you also. You should get 3/40. So you may not have followed the same pattern that I did, but we should have the same results. So keep practicing. So we have another table to complete. Let's see how quickly we can do this one. So when you're working on your homework, try and work on expediting the process as you go along. Take it nice and slow as you learn your concept, and then work at a faster pace. That way you're prepping yourself for the time limitations on an exam. So if I take a look at this one, it's in percent form. Remember, you drop the percent symbol, you run 2 places to the left, and that is going to leave you your decimal form. So if you remember, just like the 1, there's no reason to write the fraction as a 2/1, although you can write the number 2 as a fraction as 2/1. But I did say you have to simplify your fraction. So anytime you're simplifying your fraction, in other words, reducing it, 1 goes into 2. How many times? 2 times. You end up back with the number 2. So we're just going to leave that blank on there. It is not a fraction form, but it's a simplified fraction, is 2. The next one is 4.4. If we want to change this over to a percent, we're going to take that and move the decimal 2 places to the right. And if I do that, this is 1 decimal place to the right, and this is 2 decimal places to the right. So that ends up being 440%. Now look alive in that far right-hand column. It says integer, fraction, or a mixed number. So if I want to, I can take this 4 4/10 and change it into a mixed number, 4 4/10. Once again, we got to reduce that 4/10, so dividing both of those numbers by 2, I'll get 4 2/5. So that would be my mixed number for that one. Okay, the next thing that you can take a look at. They gave us a mixed number. We can change it to a percent, or you can change it into a decimal. So if you recall, if you look at that denominator, ask yourself, can I make that denominator look like 100? Sure you can. You can multiply it times 2, and what you do to the denominator, you need to multiply the numerator times 2. That whole number stays the same. So what happens here is you end up with 2 as your whole number. Now you're going to take 37 times the 2, and that is going to give you 74/100. So 2 times 50 is 100, and 37 times 2 is 74. So the way you look at this is 2 7/400. That's the same thing as 2 and is your decimal 74/100. So that would be your decimal form of that mixed number. And then from the decimal form, remember you can change it to a percent by moving that decimal 2 places to the right. And now that becomes 274%. And just so you know, you could have done this a little differently too. I'm just going to take it a different route. If you wanted to, you could have taken the 2 and 37 over 50 and changed it into an improper fraction. So that would be 50 times 2 plus 37, and keep it divided by 50. All right, and that would give you, it looks like 137 over 50. So this would be the fraction form, an improper fraction form. And if you want to change this into 8%, remember what I said, you could take 137 over 50. And if we want to go from fraction to a percent, you can do multiply by 100%. All right, and the 50 and the 100 will reduce. 50 divides into 50 one time. 50 divides into 100 two times. So now I would just take the 137 times the 2, and we will end up with 274, and don't forget the percent symbol. So you can, if you want to, go from a fraction to a percent. So now that we've practiced a lot of translating into percents to decimals to fractions and vice versa, we should be able to finish out the next few slides rather quickly. So this one is write the percent as a decimal. So 67%. Find the original decimal, move it 2 places to the left, and leave off the percent symbol. So the answer is going to be 67 hundredths. This next problem is asking us to write the percent as a decimal. So we have 1 9/10%. Again, we drop off the percent symbol, we run away from it 2 places to the left. We need to add a 0 right there because my new decimal is now in front of that digit. So 0, 1, and 9. So my answer is 19 thousandths. Once again, write the percent as a decimal. So you have 300%. Find your original decimal. Drop off your percent symbol and move 2 places to the left. So that places that decimal after the 3. So the answer is 3. Write the percent as a fraction or a mixed number in simplest form. Simplest form means to perform order of operations, which means same thing as reducing. So we're going to take this number as 2 8/10, and we want to change that into a fraction. So if you want to, you can go the route of dropping the percent symbol, moving it into decimal form. So this is where my new decimal would be. This is decimal point 028. And then from there, you can actually just translate that into a fraction that is 28 thousandths. And then reduce both of these by dividing by 4, should go into both of these. Your calculator will reduce this fraction for you. And your final answer should be 7 over 250. And that would be the fraction form that you would place in as your final answer. Write the percent as a fraction or a mixed number in simplest form. So this one is 150%. So I'm going to work this one differently. Normally on the previous one, we translated from a percent to a decimal, and then from a decimal into a fraction. And then we look to see if we can reduce the fraction. When you have a percent symbol, if you want to go straight to a fraction, you can drop off the percent symbol. Remember, this means per 100, and just divide it by 100. So now you have this fraction of 150 over 100. And if you reduce this fraction, just reducing, you're going to go ahead and you can divide out your zeros. This is dividing by 10. You end up with 15 over 10. Reduce again by dividing each one of these by 5. And you will see you have 3 over 2, or 3 halves for your answer. So that is one way to do it. The way we have been doing it is taking 150%, changing it into decimal form. This is now 1 and decimal point 5. So you can actually change this to 1 and 5/10 is how you would say that number, 1 and 5/10. Then you reduce the fraction once again by dividing each of the numbers, numerator and denominator, by 5. And that will give you 1 and 1/2. And that will give you the mixed number for the answer. So both of these work, they're equivalent. Write the percent as a decimal and a fraction. In some country, about 22.2% of the female population, aged 25 and over, graduated from college. So they gave this to you as a percent. And the instructions for this first one says, write it as a decimal. So drop your percent symbol, take your original decimal, move it 2 places to the left. So that will end up being in front of the 2's. Now don't mistake this and place this as a repeating 2, because if it were a repeating 2, we would have more 2's on there. It just keeps going indefinitely and you would have what we call an ellipse like that. But we don't have that, so we're not going to put those in there. So now I have my decimal form. And the next one wants us to write it as a fraction. So you can go from the decimal form to your fraction. And that is 222 thousandths. Remember, that's 222 thousandths. And if you divide both of these by 2 because it's an even number, or if you want, use your calculator. Remember, try to use those brain cells. Even though we like our calculator, try to do some of the simple math in your brain. All right, so this is 111 over 500. And that would be the answer for fraction form. So remember, first we went to decimal, and then we went to fraction form. Write the percent from the circle graph as a decimal and a fraction. So they gave us a circle graph, and don't get too sidetracked with the circle graph, because if you look and read, it says for region B, and region B, just to verify this, we have it right here at 14.2%. So this is correct. So we're taking the 14.2%, and they want us to translate into a decimal first and then a fraction. All right, so we're going to take this, drop our percent symbol, run 2 places to the left. The decimal form is now 142 thousandths. Right, and I'm just going to write this down as decimal. And then I'm going to take my decimal form and rewrite this into a fraction. So this is 142 thousandths. And then we have to reduce. We can divide each of these by 2. And that will give you 71 over 500. So this is my decimal form. And the second answer is my fraction. All right, this concludes this lecture.